In this video, we're going to talk about measuring the tractor and the planter for section control and good quality coverage maps. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our main menu button, and down here at the bottom right hand corner, from there we're going to go to Green Star 3, and we're going to hit on the equipment tab, and we're going to go to change settings right here on the measurements. And it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to drag in some pictures to kind of help illustrate this, but the first measurement in here is A. That's the lateral distance from the center line of the machine to the GPS receiver. As you can see, our receivers are pretty much in the center. If not, they always are in the center, unless we've added something to it. So that measurement is going to be 0. In B is the inline distance from the non-steering axle to the GPS receiver. So on a mechanical front wheel tractor, that is going to be the rear axle. On a sprayer, that's going to be a rear axle. On a combine or a four-wheel drive, that will be the front axle. So let me grab my tractor here. So that distance is going to be from this arrow right here, which is our receiver, to our rear axle. We'll measure that, and we'll plug that number in. C is the inline distance from the non-steering axle to the pivot point on the implement hitch. So if you're pulling a pivot, like a 2-point planter, you're going to measure to that pivot pin on the back. And if it's a drawbar planter, then obviously you're going to measure back to the drawbar itself. Today we've got a 2-point hitch, so we're going to measure to that pivot pin. In the picture, you'll see we're going to measure from the axle to where that pivot pin is, which is right about in there. D will always be the height of the receiver from the ground. So we're actually going to measure from where the green and the yellow meet on the receiver to the ground itself, straight down. Once we get those measurements in, we're going to hit accept, and we're going to go to our implement. So once we get to our implement, we're going to hit change offsets, and the A is going to be the inline distance from the pivot point to the front of the implement. So in the illustration, you can see the pivot point on the, like I said earlier, on a 2-point hitch, we're going to measure from that pivot pin back to the front of the implement. In the front of the implement, we use the center of the double disc cap opener. So if you look at this illustration here, we're going to measure from this pivot pin to the front set of openers closest to the tractor. Now, this isn't really where we're going to measure to on this. I'm just showing this so that you can see that we're measuring to the gauge wheel. The closest to the tractor is actually going to be one of the 4 rows up here in the center of the planter, or 5. So that's where we're going to measure to the center bolt of the gauge wheel on that. C will be the lateral distance from the pivot point to the control point of the implement. We're pulling, say, in a corn planter or a 1631. Our implement's going to be like right in the middle, so we're not pulling an offset planter or anything like that. So we will have 0 in C. B, I missed that one. B is going to be the inline distance from the front to the rear of the implement. So again, front of the implement is the front set of gauge closest to the implement or to the tractor to the farthest set. So on this tractor, it's actually going to be these center rows because the rear gangs are actually the farthest. But we're going to measure from the center of the gauge wheel to the center of the gauge wheel. And that will give us our B. D is going to be from the pivot point to the control point of the implement. And in this illustration, we use the control point as the center of the transport wheels. So again, you'll measure from the pivot pin to one of these, to the inside transport wheel, to the center of the hub. Once you get these measurements in, oh, by the way, in E, we don't have to have that. You don't have to have that unless you're pulling a second implement. So we're going to hit accept, and then we're going to make sure that our widths are correct on our planner. This illustration looks like we're set up for beans, so we got 31 rows on 15 inches. If you were still planting corn or whatever, you're setting this up for corn, then you're going to have 16 rows on 30 inches. And the same for the track spacing.